It was a glorious summer's day in the serene countryside. The air was warm. The fields were full of golden wheat, as golden as the sun above, and blocks and barrels of hay lay sleeping in the field where they had been stacked and tossed. Beside the open farmers' fields, where the barley swayed and the corn lolled, was a thick wood of wise old trees, squirrels and foxes. And in the middle of this old forest was a still, deep lake. On top of the hill was the farmhouse where the people lived, where dogs lay out on the sun-baked yard, and where chickens stooped for grain on the dry ground. Around the still and quiet lake there grew tall burdock stalks, so tall the heron bird could stand within them and not be seen. And it was here that a mother duck sat on her nest of eggs, snug down in the thick and soft reeds. The mother duck sat patiently on her eggs. She warmed them with her feathers for many long hours, and how she yawned and yawned, as all she could do was sit there all day long. She felt like this was taking so long, and she began to grow weary of just sitting there, when all at once she felt something. There was the slightest movement, and the sound of an eggshell cracking ever such a little bit. Then it seemed like as soon as this chain reaction had begun, it gathered momentum. The cracking of one eggshell was like a whisper to the next egg, whose shell also began to crack. And then the next one, and the next one. The mother duck was so happy now, and even happier when from each egg the cutest little duckling emerged. "Quack, quack," said the mother duck. "Peep, peep," said the baby ducks. Then the ducklings began to look all around them at where they were. They saw the grass and the trees and the water, and the mother duck let them look and look, because, she said, nature is good for the eyes and good for the soul. "Well, my babies," the mother duck said, "there's so much more to see than this. But wait, I need to check. Are you all out of your eggs?" The mother duck looked down at the cozy nest and she saw that there was one egg left to crack open. And it was the biggest of all the eggs. So she sat down once more and warmed this one last large egg. As she was sitting, an older mother duck came waddling along to see how she was doing. When the mother duck told her she had one last large egg to crack, the older duck asked to see it. She peered down at this large egg, and she knocked it on its shell with her beak. She said, "This happened to me once. See how tough this shell is. I'll bet this is a guinea fowl. I had one slipped in my nest for me to do all the work of hatching once too." The mother duck felt unsure about this. She had sat on these eggs for many days. On all of these eggs, including the big tough one. She couldn't just abandon it because it might not be hers. She already felt it was hers. So she sat and she sat, and at last this large egg broke open. The mother duck stood up and stared at the duckling that came out. He was much bigger than all of her other ducklings, and so ugly. For a moment, she thought about what the older duck had said, and she wondered if it could be true. "Quack, quack," she said, and the ugly duckling said, "Peep, peep." The mother duck smiled. "We shall see," she thought. On the next day, the mother duck took her babies down to the water's edge, for the baby ducks must learn to swim immediately. The mother duck waddled straight into the lake, and all the babies followed. Some of them bobbed under the water at first, but in no more than a few moments, they were all paddling their little legs and swimming as if they were born to do it, which of course they were. And there, paddling along with them, was the ugly duckling. "This is no guinea fowl," the mother said to herself. "Look how well he swims. This must be my own baby, just like all the others." After they had enjoyed swimming around in the cool, fresh water for a while, the mother duck said she would take them up to the farmyard and introduce them to all the other animals. "Except the cat," she said. "Stay close to me and watch out for that cat." So up they waddled, all of them following the mother in a wiggly line, until they reached the farmyard on the hill. As they approached the farmyard, the mother duck told them all how to behave themselves well, and then they waddled in. This seemed like another world entirely to the little ducklings. There were chickens strutting around, pigs in a pen, all making snorting sounds, and a group of other ducks sitting by a trough of water. The mother duck took her new family over to meet the other ducks, but as soon as they approached, the snooty ducks began to make fun of the largest duckling, calling him ugly. At this, the mother duck got annoyed and replied, "He may not look like all my other ducklings, but he is not ugly, and it is rude of you to say so. Just because he is bigger than all the others doesn't make him any less a duckling. In fact, I'll bet he will grow up to be the strongest duck of them all. His size already tells me how powerful and able he will be." Day after day, the other ducks in the farmyard called the large duckling ugly. They teased him and poked him until he walked around with his head hung so low you'd think he was an old swan. The poor duckling was miserable, and at last he reached as much as he could take when he overheard his mother one day saying to the hen, "I wish he had never been born." It was the most miserable moment of all for the duckling. But of course, he had only heard part of that conversation. What the mother duck had actually said to the hen was, "I wish he had never been born so large. The other ducks in the yard just don't understand him, and they do tease him so. It is that much unfair." But the ugly duckling had heard as much as he had heard, and it was too much for him, and he ran away. He ran through the long grass, through the field of wheat, and he flapped his large wings in the warm air, and he flapped them until he began to ease from the ground, and then he was flying. For a moment, soaring above the field in the air, he felt happy, and he smiled. He was flying. But soon he felt his smile dissolve once more as he remembered how ugly he was. "Now every creature can see me," he thought to himself, "and see how ugly I am." After a while, he came to a group of wild ducks living by a river. He swooped down and nestled himself close to the group. He would stay here for a while, he thought. Wild ducks would be less snooty than farm ducks. The group of wild ducks all peered at the ugly duckling. "What kind of duck are you?" one of them asked. "I'm not altogether sure," said the ugly duckling. "You don't look like us," and you don't look like the farmyard ducks. You are just ugly. Are you really a duck?" "Of course I'm a duck," he replied. Well, you are not one of our kind, that's for sure." And the wild ducks all turned their backs on him. 2 wild geese had been listening to this exchange, and they waddled over to the ugly duckling. "We will be your friend," one of the geese said. "You can come with us. We are a bunch of wild geese who live on the moor, and you'd fit in pretty well with us, I think." The ugly duckling felt hope lift in his heart, and he smiled. But then the goose said, "You are not like us. You are not a goose, but neither are you a wild duck like these fellows here. If they do not want you, you can come with us, but you will have to take your chances. The farmer chases us with his gun sometimes, and when he does, we scatter, and it's every goose for himself. If you live on the moor with us, you will have to take care of yourself, and when the farmer comes, you'll have to find your own way." One of the wild ducks turned around then and said, "He's right, ugly duckling. You would do well to go and live upon the moor. It's either take your chances with the wild geese up there, or live wandering alone. You don't belong with us, and you don't belong with them. You are an ugly duckling, like no other." But the ugly duckling didn't believe this. He didn't believe he was all alone in the world, and that there were no others like him. He knew he was not like the family he had been born into. He knew he was not like the farmyard ducks or the wild ducks. And he knew he wasn't like the geese either. But he felt in his heart that out there, somewhere, there were others just like him. And so he rejected the wild duck's idea that the ugly duckling only had 2 choices. The ugly duckling would make his own choices, and he would find his own way, and he would find the place he belonged, with the ducks he belonged with. He turned and he ran away from the river and up towards the moor, and he flapped his wings. And once again he was flying. He flew over the corn that lolled its head in the field, and over the barrels of hay and the thick, dry wheat, and he flew and he flew until he came to a small cottage. The ugly duckling glided down to the cottage and waddled around to the yard. There he saw a tabby cat asleep on the wall. He remembered what his mother had said about being careful of cats. and he held back. The cat was purring and snoring up on the wall, oblivious to the ugly duckling. But a large hen had seen him and strutted over to where he hid. "What kind of bird are you?" the hen said. "I'm not a bird, I'm a duck." The hen chuckled and clucked. "A duck? Who on earth told you you're a duck?" "Why, my mother, of course." "Your mother said you are a duck?" The ugly duckling paused, and he thought, and he felt the weight of something lift from him. He felt a strange veil fall from his eyes. Now he came to think of it, no one had ever actually said he was a duck, had they? He had told others he was a duck, and everyone he told that to said he was not like them. But his mother certainly was a duck, and his brothers and sisters were ducks. And if he wasn't a duck, what was he? He must have looked quite forlorn, because the hen seemed to take pity on him. She flapped out her great, wide, brown wing, and she put it around his small shoulder, and she said, "Come with me. The old woman who lives here doesn't see so well, and she'll never know you are not a hen too." So the ugly duckling followed the hen into the coop, and he found a warm and cozy corner to snuggle down in. The hen was right. When the old woman came out into the yard the next morning, she didn't see that the duckling was different to the other hens. But when she went rummaging around in his feathers, looking for eggs, she walked away disappointed. The duckling stayed in the coop for a few days. It was soft and snuggly. He had plenty to eat in the yard, and if he stayed with the hens, he could easily avoid the cat. But after a few days of no eggs appearing under the duckling in the morning, the old woman began to become suspicious. She stood back and she put her hands on her hips and she shook her head and said, This has happened before. Don't you go thinking you're the first pigeon ever to think he can find himself a cozy little place to sleep in my hen hatch. You ain't giving me no eggs, and so you'll have to go. Off you go now, pigeon." And she shooed the duckling out of the chicken coop. The hens waved at him as he flapped his wide wings and he soared up into the air. The duckling had now been out in the world on his own personal journey for so long he could feel the air was beginning to alter. The summer was easing away, and the coolness of autumn was arriving. As the duckling glided over fields, he saw how orange and rust red the leaves were turning. He saw how the gentle pitter-patter of raindrops played lightly on the surface of the river water. And he saw how beautiful everything was. He had never seen autumn before, and he was amazed by how glorious it appeared. He never would have thought the changing of the seasons could be so beautiful. He found a place to rest, and as he settled himself, he saw something else that was new to him. From the bushes, not far from where he sat, there came a flock of the most elegant and graceful birds he had ever seen. These birds were the purest white, purer than the first snow, and their long necks made the shape of the slow, winding stream through the land. They spread out their angel wings, and they lifted high into the sky, letting out a weighty call. They were swans, and the duckling had never seen swans before. The duckling had the strangest feeling then. This was something he had never felt before. He felt a pull towards these magnificent birds. He felt an unignorable sense of needing to get to them, to be with them. He felt he belonged with these birds. This flock of shining white birds felt like home to the duckling. These birds felt so much like home, the duckling began to follow them. At first, he felt a little bit silly and a little bit scared, for they would surely turn him away and call him ugly. The duckling was far too ugly to be welcomed by such beautiful birds. But he couldn't ignore the way he felt, and the pull was so strong. He went on until he found the swans floating around on a cool lake. The duckling glided down from the air, intending to settle a little away from the birds and just watch them. But as he approached the water, the strangest thing happened. He looked down into the water, and on the surface, he saw his own reflection. He looked again at the swans, and then he looked again at his reflection. Could this be? He looked just like them. The swans turned to him and beckoned him over, and he glided along the water just like they did. That evening, he told them his story, and the swans nodded their long, lolling heads, and they said that happens sometimes. Sometimes an egg is misplaced. And when he told them how everyone had called him ugly, they tutted and said he was beautiful and graceful. And he was. He would never have believed it, but he was a swan. That night, and every night that followed, the swan cozied down with his new family. He was at home at last, just like he had always known he would be one day. And sometimes he would venture up to the farmyard to see the mother who hatched him, and he would tell her he was still her son, and she would be so proud, because just like she had always said he would be, he was magnificent.